All right, so we're going to look at another example that uses the math library. I want to create a class, CircleStats, which finds the circle's area and circumference given the radius, then outputs the results. And similar to the last problem on rectangle, we want to use methods for each component, passing parameters and returning values as needed. So rather than telling you everything here, we want to figure it out together. So I'll start on paper, go ahead and copy this problem down. And then, or we could jump over to Eclipse and just sort of set up the comment section that shows that we've analyzed the problem. So I'll do that first. New class, CircleStats. Static void main. And we'll put my comments up here, starting with my name, your name, today's date, computer science 142, and then we need to describe the class. So let's see, find the circles, use methods, appropriate parameters, so normally we wouldn't have to say use methods, that's just a default, but because we're learning about methods, I want to put that in here. Use methods with appropriate parameters to find a circle's radius, circle's area and perimeter, then output the results. And I'll just put in parentheses with a given radius. So that's the step that allows us to analyze the problem. Do we understand what the problem is asking us to do? What's wrong with that? I'm assuming it thinks that's a spelling error, but I don't think it is. Okay. So go back to paper, write this problem down, and I want to sort of do my specs and my design phase. So step one, we understand the problem, we've analyzed it, check. I do that by writing out those comments. And one thing I'm going to look for if you have questions is have you done that? Because that's telling me that you understand the problem. Step two, what are the specifications? Well, here it's, what are the formulas for the area of a circle? The area of a circle is pi times r squared, and the circumference of a circle is 2 pi times r. And so then the design phase is, again, we need a variable r. So let's initialize r, and let's pick something for r. Let's call it 5. Okay, and then we need to calculate the area. So I have this function, calculate area, and we're going to send it the radius as a parameter, and that's the input of that function. And then we want to ask, does this function return anything? And yes, it does. It returns the circle's area. Same thing as the last problem. And then similarly, in addition to the area, we would want to calculate the circumference. Nothing wrong with just spelling it all out. That actually, if I just use CIR, the person may not know what we're talking about. I guess on pseudocode here, I could just use CIR and I would know, but in the code, I think I want to use the word circumference. Even though it's, maybe a little longer than we would normally use, it just helps the next person coming along to know what that function is doing. Again, I could use the word calculate, but it's pretty clear that calc tells us that. And then this is the circumference. Maybe I out of room there, so I'll just write it as circumference. And these guys have to be declared at some point as well. So that means we need the declaration of what type they are in front of them or above them somewhere. And then we need to output the results. And so output the results does not have output. I mean, it prints stuff, but it doesn't return anything to main. And when we output the results, we would want to send the radius, the area, and the circumference. So that becomes the essence of main when we do this. This step 3 here. That's essentially what's in main. And again, you know, these are not hard computations. I could just put the computations themselves within main and then output the results from main, but I'm trying to illustrate the use of functions here. So even though our functions are not very, they don't have very many lines of code, I'm illustrating the passing of parameters and the returning of values in our function definitions. Okay. So let's go back over to our Eclipse. And you know what, for good practice, you might just go ahead and code this. Oh, although you need to use the math.py from chapter 3. So if you want to look at that PowerPoint, how to utilize that math.py constant, you can, or you can follow along with me. You could also just set up in main the function headers so that you could get the idea of how do these headers get set up, and then we do the functions together. I'm going to do the whole thing now, but it would be good practice for you to try it. There might be something in class where I say, okay, everyone work on it for a few minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, so here we're back. Let's see if I can maybe zoom out of that and make it smaller. You know, I might want to look back on that, so I'll just, I don't know. I'm going to kind of put it behind my Eclipse because I know I don't want to take up too much space, and I want to make this guy a little smaller too. Oh, I guess you're gonna, the video is using the whole screen, so you can shrink the video down, and then it'll be smaller on your screen. Okay, so in main, we want to initialize that radius. So let's make it an integer. So we'll go integer radius equals 5. Maybe I'll put a comment here. Initialize radius. I don't need that comment, but it's just sort of telling you what we're doing there. And then, so the area, pi r squared, pi is an irrational number, so the area will be double. Double area equals calculate area, and we're going to send that radius in as a parameter. I could go on and do the rest of main with the calculate perimeter and the output the results. But I have, you know, I might as well do the function header there so that I get rid of this error first. So I'm going to come below main and go public static. It's no longer void. It's now a double because we're returning that area. It's called calculate area. You know, and I know this seems like a lot of work when we don't really need any of these lines of code. We could just say in main area equals 5 times, you know, 5 squared times pi. But again, the idea here is we're learning about how the functions themselves pass both parameters and return values. So again, we have an error on this method because it tells us there the method must return a result of type double. So I'll set up a dummy return statement returning a default value of 0.0. And this just sets up the, does the function flow from main to the function call and back work correctly? And I'll do the same thing with my perimeter. Oh, it's not the perimeter, sorry. It's the circumference of a circle. Maybe that's why it was wanting to give me an error there. And then here, let's calculate circumference. You know, that's where I might make that word a little shorter, but it's fine. Again, we have a single parameter radius, and it's returning a double. The circumference 2 pi r will be a double. doesn't like that because I haven't defined that function yet. So I'll go down here and I'll say public static double calculate circumference. It's always good to use names. Well, a couple of things about methods. Verbs are nice. So I have a typo here, C-A-L-C. Calculate is a verb. Calculate what? Calculate the area. Calculate the circumference. But also, the method name itself tells us what it's doing. So we have one parameter, integer radius. And then we'll open our brace, hit return. Again, we have an error because the method is supposed to return something. In this case, a double, so we're going to return. I mean, I could just do 0 here. That will also work. But by putting 0.0, it just reminds myself that that's a double. Okay. And then at some point, we want to be careful when you put these fake return statements in that you don't leave them in, that at some point that gets replaced. That's where the testing comes in, and the making sure that you're getting the right output for given inputs. And then we have one more function, output results, and that doesn't return anything to main, so we don't have to make an assignment like we did in these two things. And notice, the assignment is coming with the function call. The declaration is coming because I haven't used those variables, area and circumference, yet. Output results, and we're going to send it all three: radius, area, and circumference. And notice here I used the word radius upstairs. Downstairs I used the word radius as well. That's fine. Or upstairs I could have used r. It might be a little easier. So I know in the next function I'm going to want to shorten these just because I don't know. I don't have to. Let's just leave them then. We'll leave them and then we'll talk about it. So we'll say, let's see what's coming in first. Output results is the radius, so integer radius. And then we'll go double area and double circumference. Notice if you ever have typos or you have things misspelled, you're going to have errors, and that's just syntax errors, and you just fix them. Ideally, you get to a place where you don't, if you have a bunch of red X's, you want to fix those things before you move on. Okay, so we're ready to go. To calculate the area, we want to define a new variable, double. Let's just call it A. And we want to make an assignment for A. We could do this all in one step if we wanted to, but I want to show you what's happening here. A is going to equal pi times r squared. So pi is in the math library. It's a constant with capital Pi. And then I need open and close parentheses. No, I don't. Math.pi times math.power, which is POW. And I believe the first one is the base, radius, and the second parameter is the power. So that's r squared. And I'll put a semicolon there. So I used the math library twice here for the constant pi and for squaring something, math.pow. And then we'll return the area A. So then back up here, maybe we just want to have a print line statement. Now I wouldn't print A, I would print area. And what this is going to check is whether my area is approximately right. So 25 times 3 is 75. So this should be around, 76, 77, 78. There it is. Perfect. So now I can get rid of that print statement, or even just copy it out and I'll put it below this next function, because now instead of printing the area, I'll print the circumference to test the next one, which we haven't written yet, but we'll do now. Same idea. Let's declare a double. Let's just call it C. And so right here, I could say, just like I didn't do in the last one, but I could have, C equals 2 times pi, or math.pi, times the radius. And then we'll return that C. And then we'll run it. I don't know where I went. My video went away somehow. There we go. Okay. Did it go away? Okay. And does it work? Let's just think about it for a second. 5 times 2 is 10, and then times pi would be, 10 times 3.14 is 31.4. Okay, so that worked. I want to show you another sort of trick here. I won't do this in this problem. In fact, I think in this problem, I would prefer to actually have a second statement for the assignment of C. So a declaration of C, then an assignment, then a return statement. But the truth is, this entire method can be done by just returning that value and not having a C at all. So for example, let me just copy that out. Let's just delete the whole thing. I just return that assignment, 2 times math.pi times radius, I get the same thing. That's great. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's maybe a little harder to see what's going on if you're new, or if you're trying to learn sort of what we're doing here. So I'm going to leave it how we had it before. I just want you to be aware that we could do that. So we don't need that C at all. We could just return, and that's one of the reasons why these methods themselves are kind of redundant, because they're not doing anything that we couldn't do in one line of code in main. But we are doing something. We're passing these parameters back and forth, and we're trying to learn how both the input as a formal parameter and the return statement interact with main, and how you make an assignment back in main while passing the actual parameter into the function. And then, another thing to think about is when I come in here to circumference, I don't have to use the word radius here. I could just use R, or let's refactor it, rename it. Let's rename it with a lowercase r. And notice within calculate circumference, it changed that the word radius to a lowercase r. And now I have a lowercase r in there instead of the word radius. That can help us if we're confused about which variable radius we're talking about. Since I have radius here, I think I'll be consistent throughout, and I'll go back to rename, and I'll just rename it back as radius. Why is it pulling that up? I don't know. Let's close that for a second. Oh, it already did it. Okay. So because I just want to be consistent between main and the upper functions. Okay, and the last one is output results, and notice it doesn't return anything. And we just want to output the results with a series of print statements. So I'll get rid of this print statement. I am a big fan of complete sentences. So system.out, let's just make a print, not a print line. The circle with space, with radius, space, unquote, plus radius. And I'll just leave that there, and then have another print statement down here. Continue that sentence. Has area with a, I need a space before the has, and a space after area. Has area plus the area. Quote again, and circumference. Again, a space is before and after, plus the circumference. And then let's add into that, let's cheat, just because I'm sort of at the end of my page here. What doesn't it like here? Oh, I need a plus after the area here, plus. I don't want to go too wide, so I'm just going to put a print line statement now. Maybe with a period. Maybe I want just a period is probably fine. Run it. Circle with radius 5 has area 78 point blah 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 and circumference 31 point blah blah blah. Now, so we could use the function round here. Ideally, we would use some formatting, some print formatting, which is in, I want to say it's in chapter 5. Maybe it's in 4. Anyways, so there's a couple of different ways to do this. We don't quite have the syntax yet. What I can do is round them to whole numbers to cheat. So I'll just round, I think it's math.round, and we'll just round the area, and that'll round it to the nearest integer. And again, we'll come in here and we'll go math.round. This is kind of good because we're practicing the math library anyways. And we'll round the circumference, and that will round them to the nearest integer. So the area will round to 79, and the circumference will round to 31. So it's different than casting it as an integer. If we casted the area, let me just show you that. I'll show you that in a separate print statement. Maybe back in main. We can cast the area here as an integer. System. You do that by putting the word integer in parentheses and then the variable name after it. So that will, in this case, print it, because we're putting it in a print line statement, and it will take the area and convert it, truncate it to an integer. So the area was 78.5, and when we cast it as an integer, it'll just be 78. So it's not a rounding, it's a truncation. It cuts off the decimal portion. Okay, that's not part of this assignment, so we'll just get rid of that. Hey, maybe I'll tighten up I created some weird white space here. So this isn't a bad way to sort of see this. Is, here's my initialization, here's my, calculations, and here's my output. Another way to think of that would be, this would be sort of our input. There was no input, but we could have gotten that radius from the user, and we're going to do that next. This would be our calculations or our process, input, process, output. So that you might be familiar with the IPO model of coding. And so that's, the input is the radius, the calculations or the process is calculating those values, and then the output in the results. And then we'll go through, we have one space, get rid of this white space, tighten that up. That's fine, a space between there, a space between there. This is always good before you submit something, to kind of clean it up. And like if you had comments for yourself, maybe you were keeping track of something, you could take those out. Or if you had sample print statements that you didn't want in your final product, you would take those out. They were like testing statements, etc. Why don't I put a comment in here about round? Math.round rounds to the nearest integer. Okay, I think that's it. And then, yeah, the next thing we're going to look at is using a scanner to get user input, and how that would sort of change this first part of the code. Maybe we'll do that for the same code. We'll modify CircleStats so that the radius is coming from the user as opposed to coming from something that's given in the problem.